Good evening, everyone. This is Beethoven and our live Q&A discussion. My name's Sean MacLean, a host on Classical King FM for our Northwest focus. And this is our live discussion in the last day of 4 very rich days of a celebration of this genius on his 250th birthday. So earlier today, we heard the theme of being illuminated, which is frankly, celebrating this next generation of amazing musicians and also the joyous aspects of Beethoven. Certainly, we have enough of the darkness, which we've touched on, the isolation in the last few days. But in about an hour and a half, we'll be finishing up the festival with a big hurrah and celebrating the revolutionary. It wouldn't be a celebration of Beethoven without addressing that aspect of this composer who did change the way music could be done after his death. So we'll be ending on the note of hope and change and future. If you're just joining us for the first time in the last 4 days, This is Beethoven is a unification of 17 arts organizations here in the Pacific Northwest to celebrate the 250th anniversary of Ludwig the Revolutionary, the isolated, the existential, and also, of course, the hope-inducing. Now, I've had the honor of introducing the participants over the last 3 days. And for this final one, I'll start with Juan Felipe Molano, who's the artistic director of Seattle Youth Symphony, which is the model for youth orchestras around the country, which began in World War II. Welcome, Juan Felipe.
Thank you, Sean. Hi, everyone. Hi, Julia. Hi, Julia. Hi, Sunri and Joe, and everyone who is watching us today.
Nice to have you here. Joseph Siemens is the co-founder and artistic director of the Rhapsody Project. Nice to have you along, Joe.
It's my pleasure. So glad to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to join.
Julia Tai is the co-artistic director and conductor of Seattle Modern Orchestra. Hello, Julia, again. Always nice to see you.
Hi, Sean. It's my pleasure to be here. Hello, everybody. Good to see you all.
And Singwei Su is the director of programming of Amazon Symphony Orchestra. In case you didn't know, yes, they have their own orchestra. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
I think I'll start with Juan Felipe because, you, Juan Felipe, have been guest conductor, cover conductor for Los Angeles Philharmonic with the American Youth Symphony. You are absolutely passionately devoted to education and to passing on the torch to these very eager young musicians who we got to see earlier today so stunningly play. I'm wondering where you think the future lies in the next generation of musicians, and what do we need to do to continue this lineage on from somebody like Beethoven?
I think as educators, and I consider myself a teaching artist, so I think as an educator, when I go on stage and play or conduct, I am a better player by knowing my role as an educator. And when I go to the class and I teach a class, I bring kind of the excitement for being a player on stage. So I think if we if we bring awareness to all our students about so many things, we have to actually find a pathway for each student. And I think that's really important to make them aware about the diversity of type of music we can do, how much we have to explore to find specifically what's exactly what we have to go for. And that's always not the same thing we actually have idea when we actually go to college. We go to college and sometimes it takes time to figure what's that right fit. Is better an educator or player or administrator or chamber ensemble. So I think as educators, we have to always keep an eye on how to shape and just motivate the students to go and find that specific pathway. And I do think Beethoven showed us a couple of main things. First one is that we have to believe in ourselves. There is no other composer more human than Beethoven, with really sometimes basic rhythms, harmonies that are not revolutionary at all, and he just showed us so many emotions. He just took the music history to the next level because he was just too human. And I think that's one message we have always for our students, for the young musicians. They have to find their pathway, but that's actually always unique. So
you mentioned that you want to find that for every player in your orchestra. But of course, an orchestra is a big, you can get up to 100 and something people. So how do you do that for so many students individually? That's challenging.
I think it is important to connect personally with students, and from the podium, of course, you can see them as flutes, first violins, or trombones. But if you connect with them outside of the podium and you connect them truly on a personal way, where you can just have a conversation and find stories. I love to hear stories from people, and I love to hear stories from students. And when they start to relate with something we say about the composer, about the piece, every time we play Beethoven, as we all know, it's this discovery of things for students or for players, even for professionals. When we, oh my gosh, I played this symphony so many times, and today I had a realization because I connected, I related with something with Beethoven. And again, it happens every time we do it.
You mentioned the self-belief. I mean, in early Beethoven, you can hear him doing what he should be doing as a young person, which is emulating his almost teacher Haydn, Mozart, etc. But even in the first symphony, you can hear him saying, "Okay, I got you guys. I'm grateful for what you handed me, but guess what? I've got this to say."
You mentioned this first symphony, and that's one of the symphonies that I think he was first showing how much we have to write that way. So actually we start with this beautiful chord that happens to be actually taking us to the wrong place.
Yeah, it's like a question.
Because we just like, is it A minor? No, it's D major, it's G major, it's C major, but it just takes the whole introduction. So again, I think it's just too human. Like, he's just like, he should just, apparently he should just do something predictable. Okay, Beethoven, great guy, let's just do some, no, he just did the unpredictable. And I think that's what actually made him so unique.
Fantastic. My next question is for Joseph Siemens, and it's about this amazing project that you created of roots music here in the Pacific Northwest. Again, we're dealing with giving young people something of their own heritage, as Juan Felipe was talking about. So the Rhapsody Project teaches roots music, studying your own cultural heritage. I was curious to read that you, Joseph, as you co-founded this, you were reaching into the Pacific Northwest lore, and you yourself are a descendant of the Aurora Colony. Do I have that right?
That's right. Yeah, you did your homework.
Let's just explain this very interesting discovery of trying to find another Eden out here on the West Coast, the Aurora Colony, and what it meant in terms of passing on a lineage.
Yeah, well, my mother, I'm a fifth generation Oregonian, and my mother, on my mother's side of the family, they were folks that were out in Baltimore and splintered off from the Lutheran Church and came out here on the wagon train and settled. In the family, we call it the colony. They settled the Aurora Colony outside of what's now Salem, Oregon. And then, my parents were hippies. They did the whole back to the land thing in the 70s. So much more recent, not quite so in the past, but still kind of a utopian society type of situation. And that work really, and being raised in rural Oregon in this beautiful part of the world on the Cascade foothills, I was just drawn to the land and the music that was made at the folk community that I was raised in. Sang a lot of songs about the work people did along the rivers and in the woods. And so that really became a touchstone for me as I studied all kinds of music at Lewis and Clark College in Portland, and then into my career as a teacher and a musician. So that's part of my heritage.
One of the things you took for granted then growing up in this environment is that you would have access to musical instruments. And I see that with Rhapsody Project, you've made sure that there is an instrument collection so that young people we sort of take it for granted that you can get access to an instrument, but that's not something to be taken for granted.
Yeah, as I came to Seattle about 6 or 7 years ago and was, teaching in South Seattle in the Central District at Washington Middle School, and then at our community space, the Hillman City Collaboratory. And, there's a lot of families where the student wants an instrument and there's no instrument available that they want to play, or there's no instrument decent enough that they should waste their time on it, right? Because you need to have a certain quality just to have it be, so you can get a good sound out of it. And so part of our program was to establish an instrument library and say to students, okay, if you want to earn this instrument and you want to show that dedication to it, we will put it in your hands. And so that's been a really fun part of the program and has allowed a lot of people to dust off decent instruments that have been neglected in someone's basement or attic and get them fixed up by local luthiers like my friend Steve James and put them in students' hands. And that's been really gratifying.
Beethoven's life shows us that early access to an instrument is essential just to be able to hear, to what your musical soul is calling you to do. And then, of course, in the case of Beethoven, it's a good thing he did have access early, because by the time he started losing his hearing, it was all going to be in his head, not in an instrument anymore. So getting access to music early is so important to continue the lineage. And I guess I have the same question for you, which is, what's necessary to continue the lineage of music making?
Well, I think that it's doing something of what the This is Beethoven Festival has done in terms of breaking down these kind of artificial walls we put between different styles of music, right? As anybody who watched the presentation from the Rhapsody Project earlier today will have noticed, we don't teach the students classical music, although some of them have passed through wonderful orchestras like that, directed by Juan Felipe there in Seattle. And we want people to understand that, what we label as high and low culture is really kind of a false dichotomy, right? Beethoven was taking a lot of folk influence and infusing it into his compositions, and we want to celebrate that. And we want our students to understand that there's nothing inherently better or worse about music being made on a back porch versus in a symphony hall. Music can exist and should exist in both places, and is extremely valuable in those different spaces.
Amen. I just want to say, it's about how much you're engaged with the music, not whether you have plaster and high ceilings around you,
right? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you can have fun with it wherever you are. And remember, it's about self-expression and connecting with your heritage.
And you bring up this thing that people forget, is that Beethoven was listening to music in the streets and integrating it, and Beethoven was making music outdoors himself. Not everything happened under high ceilings with perfect acoustics. But Julia Tai, you have had the great opportunity, of course, to make plenty of music under high ceilings and perfect acoustics. But when we're celebrating the revolutionary aspect of Beethoven tonight, in order to finish off this festival, I can think of the fact that what Beethoven brought to the world of music is this idea of composition as something that is a personal expression. Beethoven was famous for saying that the job of the listener is to get into the mind of the composer. It's an incredibly audacious thing to say. Haydn never would have said that. Not even Mozart would have said that. This idea that your job when you're listening is to shut out everything else and get into what Beethoven was living or trying to communicate in his music. Do you think that composers today who are writing have been liberated by that?
So, yeah. So looking into, we're really excited to be able to premiere a brand new piece of music tonight, and to get into, that's why I love working in Seattle Modern Orchestra, getting to know composers and getting into their heads and socialize with them and see what they're like, and then to really understand their music and their sound world. So, being able to commission a piece that commemorates the 250th birthday of Beethoven is amazing, because every piece of music is basically a stamp of time. And the piece that we're going to hear today by Wang Lu, a fantastic composer, that she is grappling with the pandemic, how we perceive time in this age of ours, and we're missing our friends, and then talking to them, and then just our personal relationship with time. And also she is classically trained as a pianist. She knows Beethoven's music intimately, and then also musicians relationship with metronome, and that kind of creeped in her piece. You'll hear the percussionists play metronome, and then everybody start playing Beethoven excerpts. And don't want to give too much away, but it's kind of like you're in a practice room, listening to all different instruments playing their music.
People who are tuned in from the outside, we should probably explain the whole Beethoven metronome thing.
Right. So Beethoven was one of the first composer that used the metronome and then the mechanism, and then he put in the metronome marking in all his music. And then over time, there's always been the debate about whether his metronome was accurate and whether we should do it at his tempo, or maybe he didn't really have an accurate metronome, we should do it at our tempo, that kind of thing. But as a musician, practicing musician, we have a very special relationship with our metronome, like hours of playing with that metronome and just that sound, and go from really slow to really fast. And, that's our own interpretation of metronome, and it's incorporated into this piece very, very wonderfully.
Fantastic. So what do you think this year? I mean, 2020 has been a challenge for everybody. How do you think times like this are do you think they're actually going to change the nature of new compositions that you'll be contending with and promoting and performing with your orchestra?
Yeah, well, the pandemic definitely changed the way that we could present. Everything has to be online, and we moved to all of our rehearsals online pretty quickly. That we figured, composers have always created music in the space they lived in. They composed for church, they composed for concert hall, and now we ask composers to compose for the internet. So the musicians log online. We use we use Jamulus early on, and we have another program called Sonobus that let us hear each other in real time. So we could improvise with each other as opposed to recording our own music individual tracks. So that has really opened up the possibility for us to create music together still in this climate. And however, with a little bit of lag in the internet space, that we asked the composer, they couldn't write 30-second notes. Everything has to line up perfectly. So a lot of it is kind of the guided improvisation, which are premiere pieces based in, like every page had different materials that musician can contribute, but it doesn't always have to line up exactly. And in the other piece that we are performing that tonight, Ludwig van by Maurice Kagel, this piece also is a lot of it is improvisation from the musicians, and sometimes the musicians are trying to line up and play the Turkish march together, and they were just a little out of sync, and they become this beautiful piece of music because it's like you can't even notate that.
Kagel would actually love that. He would have loved that.
he would, and I think it's very interesting, that we picked Kagel because we wanted a piece that was attributed to Beethoven. It was written for his 200th birthday, and
revolutionary. I mean, it's
right.
modern.
Right, and so Kagel wanted to write a piece that was a contemporary piece contributed by Beethoven. So there are not a lot of rules in this piece, but the only number one rule is everything that we play has to be from Beethoven. So the musician go out and find concertos and even just inner voices of a string trio or quartet or in the orchestra pieces, and then we put it together and composed our own piece that is honoring Beethoven that way. And it's very interesting that the more I studied the piece, kind of looking into 1970s and then the 2020, there's a lot of parallel going on of the protest movement back then and how people are demanding social change. And then we're in 2020 kind of going through very similar things, and the movement, the protest movement resulted in Kagel kind of the anti-authoritarian, kind of taking away composer's role of notating everything, and then the musician, the performers have to take up the compositional aspects to create something by themselves. And now we are in this new climate where there's more diverse voices, and then we're demanding social change in our society and also in the classical music world at large, and that is going to make a difference. So, I was thinking last night that we're premiering this piece tonight. I hope it will be played at Beethoven's 300th birthday. I don't know if I'll be here to see it, but that's kind of continuation of this history.
Taking your vitamins, I mean, you mentioned what Kagel does in essence is to ask his musicians who are performing his score to be more like Beethoven, basically to improvise on raw material, which is what Beethoven was doing so much of his life, especially when he was still performing. Which
exactly
Which brings me to a creation that I'd like to say I wish everyone knew about, but I'm delighted that for Sing Wei, that I can tell you as the conductor, the music director of Amazon Symphony, there are people who don't know you exist. And it's so great to know that there is an Amazon Symphony Orchestra. Enlighten us, Sing Wei, about how that came about. And I should say right off the bat, so that you don't have to, this is a volunteer, it's volunteer orchestra, right?
That's right. Yeah, we are all employees at Amazon. We started maybe three and a half years ago now. I think it was the spring of 2017. A random software engineer who happened to also play oboe sent out an email to a mailing list and just asking if anybody wanted to maybe get together, maybe play some chamber music or an orchestra. And like 40 people showed up to the first rehearsal. It was a really interesting balance because like we didn't know who was going to come, like what kinds of instruments they were going to bring. So like our first couple rehearsals maybe had more clarinets than violins. So it was really interesting to sort of balance this, but it was
Juan Felipe show up, he plays clarinet as well.
yeah.
I mean, that's actually a question a lot of people might have, is Amazon's big enough that the chances statistically are good that you'll have one player of every instrument in the orchestra. But have you had to find a contrabassoon player? Have you had to find a, et cetera?
Yeah, it's actually one of a really funny story. We did actually have a few bassoons, but they're fairly rare to come by just in general in the wild, much less in a corporate environment. But one of the founding members of the orchestra was a professionally trained oboist. And he actually, when he was little, really wanted to play the bassoon, but didn't actually know what a bassoon looked like or didn't know what it was called. So he asked his band teacher for an oboe, thinking it was a bassoon, and ended up with an oboe for like the next 10 years.
So now he gets to actually live.
Yeah. So when we started rehearsing for just Amazon Orchestra, it was his opportunity to learn bassoon. So he actually did, and he switched over to bassoon just for the orchestra. And he's the principal bassoon on the Beethoven 5 performance that you'll be hearing this evening.
Fantastic. I'm just curious, is Amazon Symphony planning on putting recordings out there? I mean, I know you have done some recording.
Not for sale that I know of, I don't think. We've done some internal broadcasts, like recordings for internal events. So in this past year, with everything being shut down, we've actually had streams of our previous concerts and like chamber music and solo performances just virtually.
Okay. I mean, it would be, I suppose people might see it as a bit of too easy for you, considering the platform Amazon has, that would be an unfair advantage getting it out there. But because it's a volunteer orchestra, because people are coming together for the joy of music, I think that's why I just want to put that out there in case people are wondering, that this is not another something to line the pockets of anybody. It is, for all the best reasons, coming together to make music.
That's right. Yeah, we are definitely all about just rediscovering our joy of playing music, creating something together. A lot of us were music majors or professionally trained in the past. We range from people who graduated from Juilliard to people who, switched over to bassoon from playing a different instrument. So it's really a wide range, and it's not about having like a really polished performance. It's just about that that joy that a lot of people forget. I mean, a lot of professional groups or even community groups, they've played pieces like Beethoven 5 millions of times. But for us, many of us, this was our first time playing it. So there's a certain like excitement and freshness, and also a feeling that like maybe this is like our only chance that we'll get to play it, just because, a lot of people in Amazon come and go. So it is a very transient group.
You have the best seat in the house for one of the most exciting moments in Western music, which is the transition out of the third movement into the fourth movement in Beethoven 5. And I can imagine that never gets tiring for you, that burst of joy that suddenly shows up.
Yeah, it is one of my favorite moments in the whole piece. It's hard to like keep the excitement contained until the very beginning, that that fanfare blast in the fourth movement. But yeah, it's a glorious movement. A glorious transition. It definitely is that change, the sun coming out after all this darkness of the so-called fate motif, into something really triumphant and full of hope.
Well, speaking of hope, I mean, on this final night of This is Beethoven and 250 years this genius has been around, let's talk about the future, since all of you have a big stake in it. As arts organizations, you know, you're keeping this flame alive here in the city. What would you like to see come to the Seattle arts scene? And maybe what has this festival called This is Beethoven enabled you to think about for a future? Whoever wants to jump in.
I'll
Julia?
go first to that. I think it's amazing that we have this Beethoven festival, and I get to see everybody's work, and then to really come together as a community of arts, from theater to dance to music orchestras and Rhapsody project groups, to all come together in this effort to celebrate. And I think that the more of those collaborative efforts that we do, the more we reach out across boundaries to make art with each other, the more interesting we could make the arts, and also the more longevity that the music and art will live on.
I'll also add something. I really love how this festival has sort of continued the tradition of letting classical music be really accessible. That's one of the things that I love about Emerald City Music. The Seattle concerts are always in this really informal venue, and people just like pop in. There's an open bar, and Amazon Symphony Orchestra has really honestly been really inspired by that. Like our concerts, we wear t-shirts, we don't wear tails. We perform in like basically a conference hall, and it doesn't have those high ceilings and like the gilded walls and everything that you think of when you go to like a professional group concert. And I think it's a really great opportunity to bring classical music to more people, to share it with, share our privilege with other people. One of the things that I love about this event is that it is raising money for various charitable groups. And I think that's really fantastic.
Well, the revolutionary aspect, of course, of Beethoven that is thematic tonight can be seen in the very fact of the way music is being made with the internet tools, despite the latency that Julia was referring to, that delay that comes from all these satellite connections and all that. It's astonishing to see how people have taken up the tools, the modern tools that we had, which I think Beethoven would have used if he were alive today, to do something revolutionary, which is to bring us together when we can't physically be together. So pretty astonishing. And I want to say that since you mentioned Emerald City Music, it's pretty cool that Arts Fund has announced its award to Emerald City Music, among others, for their impact on the future. So I just want to give a shout out on my own here to the people who have made this happen at Emerald City Music. You're doing great work right now. Tune in at 8 o'clock tonight, which is in about another hour and 1 minute, the final evening of This is Beethoven. And it will be the revolutionary aspect of Beethoven's personality and his legacy. Seattle Modern Orchestra, Amazon Symphony Orchestra. And the stream is free. If you want to have access until January 4th, you can do that if you're listening right now with a donation. But make sure you're there in an hour, or This is Beethoven's conclusion. And thank you so much all for joining me for the past 4 days. Enjoy the final evening of this fantastic celebration. Thank you all. All right, bye now.